everybody, it's Claire here from Sewing by Claire, and we are today going to finish off our character, which is Clara the Cat from Lily Rose Dolls. Now Clara's part of the Apple Blossom Woodland collection of animals, and we've done her bonnet, we've done her bloomers, we've done her dress, and then the final part now is a lovely pinafore in the same fabric as the bloomers to go on the front of the dress here. So I'm really excited to do this because this is the last piece in this complete outfit that we've been doing in this sew along, and I really hope you've been enjoying sewing along with me today. Well, with this series really. So let me just show you the picture because that shows you the pinafore. Oh, Clara, stand up. Okay, so this is the kit that we've been using, and this is the pinafore that we're going to make today, complete with the ribbon roses as well, which are going to look really, really sweet. And so I want to say a really big thank you to Claire and to Richard of Lily Rose Dolls because they've sponsored this whole video series by providing me with a kit so that I can do this sew along for you and just give you a little bit of help if you needed it in thinking that you're able to tackle one of these characters, because you really are. We can do it together, it's fine, I'll hold your hand every step of the way. So we're almost there, so let me get the camera turned down and we'll get started. So the first thing we need to do is we need to find the pages for our pattern, and we've got a pocket on page 3 of the pattern, and then we've got the pinafore bodice, the straps and the ties on page 2. Now I've mentioned in the other videos, but just in case you're jumping straight into this one, then the designers Claire and Richard are professional pattern drafters, and therefore they have drawn the patterns with the sewing line, not the cutting line. So the first thing that I need to do as a domestic sewist, and obviously if you're used to working with just a sewing line, then just go straight ahead with your pattern. But if you're used to the domestic sewing market, then you're used to having your seam allowance included within your pattern. So the first thing we need to do is just to add that seam allowance. And on a straight line, it's fair enough. You can just measure down your 1/4 of an inch. Well, I'm using my 1/4 of an inch. Make a mark between the two, and then use a straight line and just draw a line across. And you do that around all 4 of those sides for the straps, and I have done here, as you can see here, for the ties. Now the thing to remember is that on the ties, you've actually got a folded edge here, so there's going to be no seam allowance there. But you do need to have a seam allowance because when this opens out, you need a seam allowance that side and a seam allowance this side. So the best thing that you can do is actually draw down your pattern piece in open, like I've done here. So if you look, this pattern piece fits perfectly on top there, but then I've duplicated the width of the tie and then I've added on another seam allowance there, and that way I just need to cut 2 and then they'll fold in half quite nicely. On the pinafore dress, we can do the straight line on the bottom, but where you've got a curved line, just use your measure. I'm using 1/4 of an inch. Put your measuring device or tape or whatever onto with your mark on the cutting line, not the cutting line, on the sewing line, and then you're just going to follow that line up over the curve, making your little marks. Like that. So you're going to follow that curve all the way down to the other side, and this will help you, give you your bearings so that you can copy that curve perfectly. Let me get to the end just here, that straightens out, and then all I do with that is I just freehand between those marks. It's pretty easy to do. And that then gives me my curved seam allowance that I can then use. And then I'll add it onto the ends and onto the bottom, and then we're ready to go. And then when I put I've used bigger pieces of tracing paper to go over the top, and then when I put my tracing paper over, you can see I've got my sewing line marked, but I've actually cut my piece of paper out at the cutting line, not the sewing line. So that's what you need to do for each of your pattern pieces. And then once you've got that done, you should have your pinafore front. You need to cut 2 of those. Your pinafore straps, cut 2 of those. Your pinafore ties, cut 2 of those. And then your pocket, which you're only going to need to cut 1 of. So then we need to go back into our kit again, and we're going to find the fabric piece that is marked pinafore skirt, and we've got a nice cut rectangle there for that. And then also for your pinafore a bodice as well, and that'll be for the straps too. So that's what we're going to be using to make our garment today. And then in your haberdashery kit, I've also got the two little ribbon bow roses, which are beautiful, aren't they? Lovely and delicate. Okay, if you want to prep all of your pattern, and then we'll talk about adding it onto your fabric. Okay, so I've just ironed my fabric flat just so that we can work with that, and I've ironed my Pinafore skirt flat, but I'm going to put that well out of the way, and I've left my label on my Pinafore skirt because I need to remember not to cut into that, and so that's really important, that we don't want to jeopardise that piece of fabric. So we've got a nice flat piece of fabric here, and we need to have a look at our different bits and bobs. Everything's cut too. Nothing's cut on the fold because I folded this out so that we could get the seam allowance on. So that's all fine. So let's have a look and see at how we can make this work for us. So let's just turn this piece of, oh, I'll tell you what, we'll do the right sides together. It's very nice and straight, which is always good. So I've got a long piece of our ties that can go on just here. We've got two straps as well that will go on just here. And a pinafore, I think that will go that way, okie dokie. So I've got all of our fabric going on our pattern pieces. We have got grain lines, but this piece of fabric has been cut really nice and straight, and so I'm going to just pin with confidence on this. So I've taken this piece right up to the edge, and then we'll just pin that on. That's the long strap piece. Just make sure when you're right up to the edge that can you see how there's a little bit of an overhang there? Just make sure that you've allowed for that in your pattern placement, so that you make sure you get two equally sized pieces of fabric when you've finished. And here's the pinafore straps that can go butt right up because that's a straight edge too. And just cut between the two of those. And if you look, I'm pinning inside my seam allowance so that we don't damage the fabric whilst we're with our pins. And then we need two of the pinafore, and actually if I cut it that way round, we've got other straight lines too. So again, I just try to maximise my amount of spare fabric whilst not jeopardising the garment that I'm making, because we want to make sure that that's all intact. Just got the corner turned under just there, my pattern. And so yeah, I'm just putting this all together. And then because we only need one of the pocket, then I'm going to keep the pocket just to one side for the moment whilst we deal with the rest of these, because these are all cut too, and then I'll be able to unfold this and then cut out one of my pattern on the other side. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do then is just start cutting out, and I'll come back to you once we have then cut out each of these pieces. That's got the first pieces all cut out on the double, and then I can just take my pocket, got a nice little shaped piece just here that I can use, and I'm just going to pin the pocket into place, and then we can cut around that, and that will give us all the pieces that we need. Okay, so we've got all of our pattern pieces cut out now, and if you want to get your iron and your ironing board, because we've just got a few bits of ironing to be done, we're going to do some pins as well because it's quite small ironing that we're doing. Let's start off with something nice and easy. Let's take our pinafore straps, and we're just going to fold those right sides together, and then we're just going to press those in half. Nice and easy, isn't it? We like easy things to start off with. We're then going to take our pinafore ties, and we're also going to press those in half just so that they stay together whilst we sew down those edges. Just put them right, cut edges together, and then they should press quite nicely for you. And then we're going to take our pocket and we need to put 1/4 inch seam allowance around each part. Now, I've got a different way of doing my corners on my pockets to make sure that they stay nice and neat, and I don't know whether you will enjoy doing this or not too. But let's have a go and see how we get on. So I'm going to use a couple of pins. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fold over to the wrong side 1/4 inch on each side. So let's just make sure we get that at one side. It's a little bit fiddly because it's just such a small piece of fabric. Watch out you don't burn yourself on your iron. Just do one side at a time and I think you'll find it easier. Just drawing that piece down. Let's do the opposite side first. So turn it round and then we want 1/4 inch on this side too. There we go, that's the second side. And then we're going to come to the two ends now and we're going to fold those over at the top as we have done. And this would be how you would do it traditionally. You just fold these edges in. Those pins just help hold everything down. It's going to bounce up a little bit because of the amount of fabric in that fold. And then again on the edges here. And then just fold that edge as well, just there. So we've got a nice little neat little square, and you might think, that's great, what's wrong with that? Nothing at all. My only bugbear when you fold things in with this way like this is that the raw edge is just on that corner, and it's really can be tricky to make sure that when you're sewing you keep those corners tucked in. So let me show you a little trick that I've got to help with that. So for the purpose of demonstrating, I've just used my Frixion pen just to mark the crease lines in there. Can you see those pen lines? One going across and one going up. And you get this little square in the corner here. And what I want you to do is to open this out and then to take off the end of that square with your snips or your scissors. Where's my snips gone? I'll just use my scissors for now. Just take off that end. So you've kind of cut the corner. Because then what I want you to do is then on your ironing board, I want you to iron this crease so that you go across there, ending with the fold of the fabric on this point just here. So we're going to fold that in to that point there. You can see the point on the edge of your fabric there. So you just fold it over. And I know this seems like a lot of faff, but I'll show you the reason why we do it in a second. Just trust me. Then when you folded that in, then go back and fold in both sides over the top so that that then joins in the middle. So it looks like that. Just watch your fingers, especially if you've got your steam on, because that is going to be hot. So if we compare the two corners, the corners that we were doing before was this one here, where you've got this, when you fold it over, you've always got a little bit of an edge that can stick out on the edge of your corners, and you can try and tuck that in as much as possible, but you can sometimes sew it and you've got that little bit coming out that just looks really messy. Can you see that? That little bit just at the top. Whereas if we do it this way, which is a little bit more effort when we're pressing, but can you see how that's now, let me hold it like that, how that's folding shut? So there's no raw edges then anywhere near the corners of your pocket. And if we do that on all four sides, you've got a nice sharp bit just here, look, so that'll still look nice. So that's what I would suggest we do. We just go back onto the others. We take off that corner just between those two fold lines. You can just see it just sticking out. It's literally all that much you're taking out, and you take that out because we don't want that extra bulk in that corner. And then you can see in here where that cross line is there on the fold, you've got a point in there, and that's what you're now going to iron over to. So just fold it over with something or another, just to hold that in place while you just give it a quick press. And then we've got the memory of the folds on the side, so then we just fold this side down, and it should end at that corner, and that's end down, and it should end at that corner, and it gives us what's called a mitered corner. Use your pins if you need to, just to hold it flat for you whilst you press it. And the more you do them, the better you'll get at doing them, because I mean, I've done a few in my time. Just take a little bit of time. But can you see how that's almost like going in like an envelope? And then if you go on the other side as well, you can see that that's just really neat. And you're not going to have to battle with any of those corners poking out, because as we sew around, we're going to then just catch all of this down, and that will hold that in place, and that will just be all lovely and neat. So I'm going to do the other two corners the same, so that gives us a really nice flat pocket, and then we'll have to top stitch the top of that, but we'll do that at the point of doing these as well. We don't need to do anything with the Pinafore bodice at the moment. We're just doing all the prep of all the accessories, so that as we get started, then we can get going. Okay, so before we start to sew these ties together, what I want you to do is to just get a long piece of thread. So you want it to be at least double the length. These might be a little bit too long, but if we put the two ends together, I want it to be able to sit down the length of the tie here, because we're going to help us turn that out. Now you might have some turning tools, and if you have, you won't need to do this. But what we want to do is just put the loop of the thread over the top of the tie like that, and then fold it over. So you want a bit of a gap between the two, because it needs to grab hold of a few stitches. But then down the length of the tie, you want to make sure that those threads are well inside and along the crease that you've ironed in already, because we don't want them in the side. Okay. You can pin this shut if you want to, but because we've ironed it, it should be fairly stable. I've got pink thread in my machine. Let's set our machine up for a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then we're going to then just sew across the end here, reverse stitch at the end. And then we're going to get to the edge, and we're going to put our needle in our work, and then we're going to check and see if we've got our 1/4 inch seam allowance. Maybe just one more stitch. That's it. And now we're going to run down the length of our tie. I'm just going to reverse at the end. Needle out of the work, and let's take those starting threads off. Be careful not to cut through your loop, because we need that little loop to stay in place. And then we've got our little loop at the top there. I don't know if you can see that, just there. And then we've got our threads down here. So now we can pull on our threads, and what we need to do is we need to sort of cradle this tie so that this will go in. But before we do that, now we've got the thread down, let's just take off a slither off the corner just there, and let's take a slither off the corner here to help this all lie flat when we've sorted it out, when we've turned it. So that's just cut those ends off at the top there, and put the light on, that might help. Okay, and then you're going to cradle this in your hand, because we want to create a tube where this is going to tuck in. And it might be that you just pull the sides apart and you just start to help that first little bit turn through. So just tuck that first little bit in, because then if we pull on the string and hold on to the outside edges, this will help us turn this tie through. And I use this method when we've got a closed end, when we wanted a neatened end. There we go, it's starting to go now. So you just watch, and as we pull, I can pull that fabric off the end, and it's starting to turn inside. Just have to be gentle with it, because you don't want to break your thread. There we go, it's all starting to turn inside now. And here it comes just out the end there. So just take your time with it and just pull gently. And then just pull that thread off the end there. Okay, and once you've done that, you can then either cut your thread or just pull it out, and then you can use it again if you want to. So just roll these edges now, just between your finger and thumb, just to get those nice and flattened. Got a thread on the end there, it's come off now. And then I'll just go in with a pin and just tease out those ends and those points, just to make sure that that's all going to be nice and flat. So I'm going to do the other long tie in exactly the same way. So I've got a nice square end there, look, without too much bulk, because we trimmed off those corners. And that's going to sit just all really nicely. Okay, so there's one tie, and then we can take this to the ironing board. We need to make sure that we roll this fabric between our fingers just until we get those stitches right on the edge there, so that we make sure we've got the full width ironed out, otherwise it can go a bit narrow in places. And then you're going to do the other one exactly the same and pop it to one side. On these little flat ones here, we don't need to sew across the ends because they're both going to be hidden within the pinafore dress. So we're now going to just put those in and do a 1/4 inch seam allowance down the sides of those. Now we'll reverse at the top and at the bottom. And there we go. Now I'm going to do something slightly differently with these because I'm going to get my ironing board out. And what I want you to do with this is just give it a quick press flat first, because that just sets the stitches. And then I'm going to open out the seam allowance on one side first and press that open. Just watch out for the steam if you've got steam on my iron and it is very hot. And then fold it over, and then you're going to fold the other seam allowance back on itself. So you're opening out that seam allowance. This just helps it when we turn it through for those seam allowances to be flat. So if you look, I've got my 2 seam allowances now folded out flat. Because now what I want to do is just start this off, and it takes a little bit of going just to get it started to turn inside out. Then you can reach inside if you've got nails, and then just start and pull it through. If not, just use a pin just to dig inside that fabric, and then you can just gently tease it out and tease it through. Just be careful while you're pulling, because you're going to pull threads out if you're not careful. But if you do, you can always go and cut another piece and then just try again, because we have got plenty of this lovely pinafore fabric in our stock. So whichever way you like, just turn this through the other way. Once you've got it through, if you look down the tube, can you see how those seam allowances are sitting flat? Because I want you to press it now so that the seam allowances are flat open and that the stitch line is down the middle of your piece of fabric. Just roll it out just to make sure that it's the same width all the way down. It should be, because of the seam allowance that we've used. And press that flat. There we go. And then we've got your seam line down the middle, and then that'll make a really nice strap for on your pinafore dress. So go ahead now and do your second tie and your second strap the same, and then I'll meet you back here and we'll talk about what we're going to do next. So just to bring you up to speed, whilst I was ironing my ties and my pockets, I've actually taken the skirt part. I did have to trim a little bit of the selvage edge off, so just be aware if you've got any selvage edge still attached to your fabric. I've then turned it all in by 1/4 inch and pressed it, and I've mitered my corners again the same way that I did for the pockets. And I do that for any corners that I've got, so that'll look really nice on the pinafore when we get down to do that. So I will zigzag just down the edges. I don't go right down into the corners of the mitered edge, so I'll just zigzag down that edge and just zigzag down those, and then when we're going to top stitch in a minute when we get round to doing the pocket. We'll top stitch there. If you want to zigzag over the edges of your pocket, you can do, but it's just going to be really for decoration, so it will be functioning. You will be able to put your finger inside it, but I'm not going to actually zigzag along that edge there. I'll just top stitch that and that should be okay. So yeah, get your skirt piece, iron it. Don't do anything to this top edge here, because we're going to, so there's the 3 sides that so I've done 2 short sides and 1 long side, just turned it in. This side we don't need to do anything with, because that's going to be gathered like we did our waistband on our dress, and so we don't need to do anything with that at this moment in time. So I have my machine set up with my pink thread, and now let me just switch that on, and we're going to go on straight onto a zigzag stitch. Let's get that out of the way, we've only got a little bit to do. I'm taking my stitch width down to a 3 and my stitch length is at a 2. I'm going to unfold the edges, but not into the mitered corner, and then just starting at the top here, just going to go down round all of these 3 edges. Take those threads off. And just take our starting threads off, and then we're just going to go along and just take off any of the whiskers that we've done before, just to neaten all of that up, because otherwise they can sometimes poke out. Right, so let's take it down to our straight stitch, and we want it onto position 6.5 for our needle. And then we're taking it down, we've got it on a 2.2 for a construction, so that's fine. So just refold those edges in. And I'm going to sew it from this top edge so that we can keep an eye on that edge that we're stitching. Just make sure that that's all right. Just fold your corners in. You can pin it if you want to. Sure if it's quite necessary, but you want to keep your stitching nice and straight, because this will be visible from the outside. When you get to the corner, just go down towards the corner and then just put your needle in your work right in that mitered edge. So you've got one bit to cut down, and then change direction, leave your needle in the work, lift up your presser foot, change direction. Make sure that's all lying all nice and flat. And straight. Fold in your mitre. Again, we're going to stop in the same place on the mitre. That's it. And then twist round for the final side. Needle out of the work and take our little apron skirt off. Where's that other thread? There it is. Okay. So then we've got a really nice edged on the corners there. Lovely edged skirt, all nice and neat. A little thread just there that I might just need to just tuck in or snip off. But that's all nice and neat too on those corners, and look how those corners are on the inside, just really nice and neat. Okay, so then the next thing we're going to do now is just top stitch across the top of our pocket as well. So choose where you're going to top stitch there, just to hold this edge down, and you might need to just use your threads just to pull your fabric through. We're just doing one edge. We just leave some long threads on that, then we can poke those down to the sides so they don't poke out. So that's our pocket just top stitched on that edge there. And if we take a hand sewing needle, we can just thread You start, if you've got short threads, then just poke the needle down into the hem you've just sewn, and then you can then take your threads. Okay, so when you threaded your needle, I just changed my needle to one with a bigger eye. Then you can just pull those threads down inside that hem, and they'll never come out. And then if we just do the same with these ones again, these are a little bit longer, so we can thread those over, and then just point that needle through that gap, and then pull on those, and then snip them off really close to that mitered edge. And you've got nice neat little finishes on the end of your pocket corners. Okay, so then the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to now be working with the Pinafore front. Take our bottom piece off, and we're just going to work with one first. Now the first thing that we're going to do is take one of your long straps. I usually put the sewn edge down, and we're just going to sew that right, put that right in the middle of that section just there. So that's the little short edge. So one that way, then we take the other. So we're not using the finished edge, we're using the open edge that we're putting in here. And we're going to turn it so that the stitch side of our strap is down, and we're going to pop that into the corner just here and put a pin on. And then I'm just going to run a couple of stitches just along there, just to hold that in place for us on both sides. So it's less than 1/4 inch, but we just want it to be right in the middle of that strap. And we want to be sewing it at less than the seam allowance. Let's do the other side as well to hold that one in place. Just make sure your strap doesn't move and go out of position as you're sewing over it, because you need to have it in that. And there should be 1/4 inch at the top and 1/4 inch at the bottom, because that's the seam allowance that's been allowed. So you've got your bodice for your pinafore now with your straps attached into there. Now the next thing that we're going to just do is, because the way that Claire's done it on hers is that she's sewn the straps on afterwards, and I just wonder whether we could just put them in as we're doing our seams. So let's just fold this in half and get a halfway point. Let's just finger press that, and then I'm going to put a pin in just to mark that line so that you can see. So that's our halfway point on our bodice. Because if we get Clara and we put this up against her and put that in the middle, at the centre point in the middle of where her collar meets, then we know that we're right on the centre of her dress, and it goes right up by the centre of her nose. We can then take a strap and then estimate where that needs to go in to the bodice. I'll just put a pin in there, and I'll measure it in a second and I'll let you know, because we want that to go over her shoulder. Move your ribbon out of the way, get the other one. So I'm just estimating where they might go over her shoulder to attach her pinafore onto her, and that's going to go there as well. We're going to just copy the line of the bodice. So let me just now take my seam gauge and just see if we're halfway between the two. So that's 5/8 of an inch, and that's just over 5/8 of an inch. Let me just move that one in just slightly. So I'm putting both of my straps at 5/8 of an inch to the centre pin. Okay, and I'm just going to tack those down. Okay, so we had a bit of a video malfunction, so I do apologise. I have jumped ahead, but let me go back and tell you what we were doing. So the last time you saw me, I was then measuring the distance between these two straps on the front of the garment. I then positioned them both so they were 5/8 of an inch away from the centre point. If you're making this pinafore for a larger character, just remember that your positioning will be different. So mark your centre point on your bodice, hold it up to your character, use either the centre of the nose or the centre of the dress or what have you for your placement, and then see where you need to go in order to have the straps, so that when when the pinafore is being worn, the straps will go over the shoulders for you. So I can see that that method of working it out has worked really well for Clara for this one. And then what you do then is I just did, like with the side straps, I just did a few stitches just holding it onto one side of the fabric, because you're only using one side of the bodice front at first, aren't you? And then just tack those in place so that we can then take the pins out. Then what I did was I got the second piece of the bodice and put it over the top, and I matched these sides first, and then I then pinned across the front top here. Just make sure that on your side edges here, you feel for the edge of the strap, because you can feel through it with your fingers where the strap is. And I used a Frixion pen to just give me a little mark on the edge where that strap was. And I knew that I needed to just be one stitch beyond that when I was stitching this, because if you don't, you're going to start and catch the top edge of your strap into this seam here, and then you won't be able to pull your straps out properly. So you need to be off your stitches once you pivot and change direction, needs to have cleared your strap on the inside. So that's why I just put a little mark either side with my Frixion pen, and then I could then knew where I was going with that. I then put in the machine, and then 1/4 inch seam allowance, reverse stitched here up to the top here, pivoted here off my strap, followed the curve of the top of the pinafore dress, back to here, pivoted again down to the bottom, and then reverse stitched. Before I turned it out, I then put some little triangles in the top just up here to help that curve sit nice and flat. And then I also just angled off my corners as well to remove the bulk just there. Once that was done, you can then turn it round. So as I say, apologies that I jumped ahead, but I thought it was being recorded and it wasn't. And you can use a pin just to pull out the fabric in any corners that you've got at the top of your straps, just to make sure that that's going to lie nice and flat for you. Okay, so got that. And then you want to then use something like your seam gauge to just then coax out the curve at the top of the bodice here, because you want that nice curve between your straps. And then when you pull your straps out at the side, then this is how it'll look, all lovely and like that. And as we can see, if we put that onto Clara, that's going to fit really beautifully and just go over her shoulders really nicely. Okay, that's where we were. So my apologies, these things happen, technical difficulties happen sometimes. So let's move on to the next part. So I was just trying the bodice top onto Clara just to have a little look and see where I think that the straps ought to go. The front I think is fine. Could have perhaps been, you know, you could get away with slightly closer. So I'd say anywhere between 3/8 of an inch and 5/8 of an inch from that centre point, and that's for the 10-inch doll. Because it's just perhaps just off her shoulders just slightly. I think the balance is right. When she's got her collar down, it doesn't look like it's strangling her, which is what we don't want it to look like, and it looks kind of quite nice if it's going over the shoulders. So if we just now turn her round to the back, I've just got the straps pinned in place at the moment. And what I've found is that if I come in slightly along the strap, can you see there's the edge of the bodice? And then if we come in slightly along the strap, that gives a nice effect at the back here for that. And then when we use these ties to tie into a bow, if I just move that pin out of the way, then when that's cinched in, that's going to be almost at the back there. So I'm happy with that pattern, with that placement of those straps. So let's just take this off now, and then just have a little look on here. Now you've got to be careful when you're putting your straps on, or we all have to be careful, not to get our straps twisted. So when you are putting your straps on, you're going to put it on flat from here, and then you then have to have this like this arch in the top of your strap so that you don't accidentally, let me just put a mark on there just so I remember where that is, so I can iron it off in a minute, so that you don't accidentally just put your straps like that way round, okay? Because then when you tie your belt for your bow, you're going to see your seam line. So you need to make sure that when you straighten your straps up, you then use that same front side to then go onto your strap just here. I hope that makes sense for you. So let me have a look and then see where we were. So that strap was just there because I put a mark on. So let's have a little measure again and just see. So how much have we got there? Oh, I've got 1 centimetre. So 1 centimetre to this edge here of gap. And that's just over 1 centimetre. So let's just do this one just over 1 centimetre as well, about 1¼ centimetres. You want them to be even into the back. And I've got the end of the strap about halfway down my tie as well. Make sure they're square on as well. Then that should then make that just nice. Let me just measure that again. Yeah, that's 1½ centimetres. And that's 1½ centimetres just under. Okay. So then what we're going to do now is we're just going to take some hand sewing thread in our pink, and we're just going to catch the edge of those straps down. Oops, get that colour off. Now we have to be careful because we don't want any of our stitches to show on the other side. So just thread your needle and let's just take a nice little bit of our time. And have our needle, let's have our thread singly. We don't need it to be, it doesn't have to have a lot of pressure put on it. Just put a knot at the end. And I'm going to do the same kind of casting on that we've done before, where we lose, we're going to lose the knot underneath, so that's fine. So if you've got any fraying edges on the edge of your strap, then just snip those off so that it's nice and flush. You can zigzag over the edge of your straps if you want to, but they're not really going to be seen. Now I'm going to take my thread inside my strap and come out at this top corner. Oops, if I can do that, she says. Because then we can bury the knot inside that strap end. And then I'm just going to take just a couple of threads off the strap, and we'll do a couple of stitches at the top edge just up there. And then we're going to just take a few little stitches just down to attach this strap down onto our tie. So we're off the end of the bodice. Look, there's the end of our bodice, and we've got 1.5 centimetres there. And just keep checking with the other side of your, I can see the pin there, but I've not got my needle going through. And we're just going to attach that down. Just make sure again. It might be a little bit difficult on that frayed edge, just slightly, because there's not a lot to hang on to. For our threads. So once we've got round most of the way, let's take that pin out. And then the other thing that we can do, just to make sure that because we haven't got a very good edge on that bottom, is if we just come through the strap. And if you just fold the strap back slightly, so back on itself, so you can see your stitches where you were attaching it, we can now just run a few little stitches through between this area here, because you have folded the strap back. I'm just taking a few little stitches. You want them hidden down into that little gap, but that will just help anchor everything down as well. It's good to practice our hand sewing as well, isn't it? Because it's a useful skill to have. And back out the other side. Just making sure that we've not got anything going through. And then if you just fold that strap up, you can see that you can't see any of your stitches on there. It's nice and invisible. So let's go back to our strap just here. And we can go on the edge of the strap just here and do a few stitches in place just to tie off that thread. And then if we just then bury our thread in by just going in between the two lines of the strap and come up further up our strap, we'll then have a nice long end. Put a little bit of pressure on the strap, and then that's what it looks like on the inside. And you won't ever see that once that's up against the character, you won't see that. And then we're just going to do the other side exactly the same. Okay, so I've just finished sewing on both sides. Let's just have a quick trial on again, just make sure that we've got this in the right place, because we can correct it, can't we, as we go along, whereas if we get to the finished garment, we might not feel like correcting it. So there it goes, onto a top, goes under her arms, and then, yeah, that looks good to me. Just do a tie like that. So that's how it looks from the back, just really just right at the back of where that bow's going to go. And that fits really quite nicely on there. Okay, so we do have a little ribbon bow to go on the front of the pinafore dress, but I really suggest that we don't sew it on just now. It would be easier to sew on now because we can go inside here and we'd be able to sew it on nice and confidently. But I do think it's going to get in the way while we're sewing our skirt on, so I'm going to ask you to resist the temptation to put it on just yet, as we're going to make sure that we can get the skirt on first for the bodice. And what we can probably do is get inside before we sew down the lining side to the back of the gathers, and we can get inside and do it then. So let's save that just now. The first thing that I want to do now is go back to our skirt piece of fabric, and then we're going to choose which side our pocket goes on. So choose your top edge that you've had top stitched. To have a quick look, and it went on the, as you look at it, it went on the left side on the picture, and it goes, yeah, about halfway up, I think. So let's make sure that's nice and straight, and the way that we can do that is take our bottom edge and measure up. So if we take that up to 1 1/4, and then when I pin my pockets on, I pin with the centre of my pin into the centre of the pocket and the point going out to the point. So let's do 1 1/4 here. That corner just needs to come down slightly. This is just how we make sure we've got things straight. And then again, I'm going to put the centre of my pin into the centre of my pocket. I'll show you in a second when I pick it up. So that's how I pin my pockets on. Can you see the point is going to the edge and the centre of the pins are at the top? So let's now pin the rest of this on place. So all the heads of the pins are all at the top, and the corners have all got the points just to hold that in place. And we're going to just top stitch this down. So it feels like that's just folded it up slightly. And so we're going to just start at the top here, reverse stitch there, and then come all the way down, pivot on that point there, across to that point there, pivot there, and up to top there, and then reverse stitch again. Just so that we've got that pocket tacked on. And it's much easier to do it now than before we start to gather, because then it does start to make it much more difficult to do that. So I'm going to move my needle all the way across to the left. And I've got a 2.2 stitch lengths, that's fine. And then I just have the edge of my, let me just lift this up and show you. So I just position my presser foot so that I can just see the edge of the pocket just inside that hole there for when I then start to stitch. So I'm going to start stitching in there, and I just have it like that so I can just see the edge of the pocket. I found that makes it much easier for me to top stitch. So I have got my glasses on because it's quite close up. Let's get that in the right place, and then if you hold on to your threads at the back, you can offer your needle up to the edge to see whether you feel that you're close enough to the edge of the pocket, because you want to be right on that edge. And I am now, so I'm going to put my needle in the work, but I take out that first pin now. So I'll wait until I've got my needle in position first before I take out that first pin. That pocket there is just, so take that pin down there. I'm going to use my awl as well to help hold everything together. So let's hold on to our thread, a couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back to hold that in place. And then we're just going to go down, just keeping that nice edge and that stitching nice and flat. And then when you get to the end, just hand crank it down so that you finish right on your corner. And then we're going to run right across the edge of this. Oh, that's not quite. Oh, it is, that's fine. So just keep your eye on things. You're going right on the very edge. Just take a bit of practice. You'll get there in the end. When we're getting close, you can take your other pin out. Got my awl holding everything in place. And then one more stitch, just right onto the corner. We're going to come back up this side here again. So again, just having your needle in the work and pivoting really, really helps. And then as you get so close, then your pin starts to distort your stitches, so you need to take that out. And then you can then come up to the top, and then you can reverse. Needle out of your work. And then if you leave some long threads on your stitches, what you can do then to neaten this all off is you can pull on your stitch on the back. So where you've finished, you can do this. Where you start, you can't, because we reversed our stitches. So if you go to the underneath and then you pull on the stitch, you'll get the little loop of the bobbin thread from underneath, and you can just tease it up so that you get a little loop like that. Hopefully you can see that. And then when you pull it, you'll pull the thread through so that you've got both of your threads from one side. So you've not got any little thread end sticking out. On this side, because you reverse over your thread, it's not possible to do it like that. So on that one, all you need to do is just thread your loose end and then go through on your pocket and take your thread through to the other side. So now we've got all of our threads on the other side, and there's our lovely neatly stitched pocket. And then what I do then is I just knot these two pieces of thread together. So take the two from each side. So just do two little stitches there. And then if you want to, you can just snip it off, just a nice little tuft. And that just makes it just nice and neat, and you know that those stitches are never going to come undone, and they're never going to poke through onto the good side of your stitching and make a mess for you. So two stitches there, and then literally just a few millimetres of thread just so that they're not going to undo. That's how it looks on the back. Okay, so we now have our pocket on, which is looking lovely. So now we're going to change our thread colour over, because we're going to put 2 rows of gathering stitches along the top edge of here, one at 1/8 of an inch and one at 3/8 of an inch, and then when we sew through at 1/4 of an inch, our stitching line will fall in between both of those. So let's change our thread over. I'm just going to put some cream in mine, use the other colourway, and then that should be absolutely fine. So let me just change my machine over and I'll be back. Okay, so I've got my machine all set up with my cream thread. We're going to drop our tension down, go down to about 2.5 on mine, and we're going to take our stitch width up until about a 4. And that will give us some nice gathers. Then we need to leave a tail. So remember, if you've got a machine that cuts off your threads, then you need to leave a tail of threads, because some machines cut them off really close and that won't work for you. And then we're going to run 1 row of stitching along at 1/8 of an inch. And we're not going to reverse at the start and the beginning, we're just going to go straight across. And then leave a tail at the end. And then we're going to put it back into the machine, and we're going to do another row of stitching slightly below that as well at about 3/8 of an inch. This is what we should be left with. And what we're going to do now is we're just going to, before we do anything else, we're going to fold it in half and put the 2 of those neatened edges together to find our centre. because this is going to help us make sure that we get even gathers all the way along. Oops, putting that pin in a bit backhanded, aren't I? So that one's going in there, and then if you bring each side into the centre, you can put another pin in to give you your quarters. And it does just help just to distribute that, or for you to be confident that you're distributing your fabric evenly. And another one in this side. It just needs to be approximate, just to help you be able to place those on that crease. So we've got the 3 pins in, and we've got the start and the end. You're then going to take your bodice. Now you need to make sure that you're using the right side, because there is now a front where you've not got a seam down the middle of your straps, and there's an inside where you've got the middle down the seam of your straps, and we've got the ends of the ties on. So we want to make sure we're working with this top piece here. First thing we're going to do is fold it in half, and then we're going to just put a pin through just to find that halfway point for us. I have gone through both at the moment, but don't worry, we're going to come back and just take that through one. So now we can open it out, put your finger between those 2 sections, and then just move that pin so it's just between one piece. And then we can again fold those edges in to the centre to give us a quarter. Just put a pin in as best as you can, just open it out. You just need to have that just marked, and then again this side too. And so that's where we are. So these 3 pins now are going to get gathered up so that they fit between those 3 pins, and then the ends will go on the ends. So let's just take our time and sort this through. So first of all, we're going to separate out our top and bottom threads. And I usually try to gather my bobbin threads. I think that's easier to work with. And then so you hold on to your threads in one hand and finger and thumb round your fabric in the other, and then just pull the fabric along the tight threads, and you should get this lovely gathering motion start. There's more details about, if you need some more help with gathering, then have a look at the bonnet video, because we had to gather this hat up, and so there's quite a lot of detail on that, about how to do a bit more detail anyway for you. Now when I've got to the centre pin, then I go to the other side, separate out the 2 threads from the back then. You can use a quick unpick or your fingernail, whichever you can use, and then hold on to those bottom threads, just those 2 there. The top threads are just loose on top here, and then again just pull on the fabric along those threads, and it'll start to gather up for you. So once you've kind of got it roughly round about where you think it should be, what we're going to do then is take our bodice and flick it over. So we're putting right side of bodice to right side of the skirt. Put your pins on top of each other at the centre there, but then you can take them both out and just replace with one. And I keep the pin heads up outside here so we can then work through where we are next. Then we're going to take the next pin, we're going to put those 2 on top of each other, take them out and replace with one. So don't worry about the gathers at this moment in time, we're just getting our placement. And then this end bit here, where our threads are, just make sure your threads are going down. And we want that to be right on the cusp of where the seam allowance is, just on the end there. So that's got to end right just there. And then we're going to put a pin in just at the end there. Hold that together. Just go through your seam allowance if you want, just to give it a bit of extra anchorage. And then we're going to go to the other side now, and we're going to do exactly the same at the other. Find the end of your pinafore dress bodice, and then lie those exactly on top of each other, and then you're going to put a pin through to hold that in place. So then we can go and have a look and see how we're doing with our gathers. So here we can see we've got a bit extra. So again, let me just confirm, we've got the lining side, the inside edge of the bodice free. We've just pinned to the front edge of the bodice, okay? So we've got a couple of places where our threads are not quite tight enough, so we can now go in, find our long threads, and then we're just going to gather this up a little bit more until the threads are all at the right length, so that they all sit on top of it. Oh, I've not done that one, look, let's do that one first. I've not done that one. So the 2 pins at the 3/4 point I hadn't done. That's it, that's better. So now you can use your fingernail to just ease those gathers along. And remember, you're just working out from the outsides into the centre, so you have to make sure you've got the right threads in your hand for when you want to tighten things up. And I'm just using my fingernail just to move all those gathers along that edge to make sure that they're right. Once you've got that done, you can see we've got a bit of a flat spot just there, so I'm going to move my gathers across so that they're nice and even. So you don't want anywhere where it's too gathered and anywhere where it's too flat. So just make sure they're all nice and that you've not got any excess fabric at all in there. Okay, so that's all done now. So now we're going to take it to the sewing machine, and we've got to just be careful because we've got if you look, you've got the top of your tie. Let me move that thread out of the way. You've got a little bit of a 1/4 inch seam allowance there for the top of the tie before you're onto your tie. So we need to make sure that we don't sew any of the tie in with the skirt, with the waist seam that we're doing on the skirt. That's all got to be, we've got to be quite tight on the edge there. So need to change our thread back over to pink, so let me just do that. So I've got pink thread now in my machine. I've also tightened up my tension because we were gathering just a moment before, so I've tightened that back up to just under 5, and I've taken my stitch length down to 2. I've set up my 1/4 inch seam allowance. So what we're going to do now is we're going to just sort of pull back this lining fabric so that we can see that transition at the edge here between where we're going to be sewing on the bodice and come onto the skirt. Seam allowance is going to stay straight. It's a little bit fiddly, so just bear with it and just try and get the best match that you can. And I can kind of see mine there, so that we can get that all on there. Oh, I'll tell you what, I'll move my needle over to the left instead, and that will be better, won't it? So position 0.5, and that will then. So I can look with through my little slit on my presser foot, hole, and I can see where thread's going to start. You get my thread ends, very big on there. And we're going to be almost straight onto a pin, so we just need to take notice of that. So a couple of stitches forward just to anchor those threads. So I actually started just into the lining side of the bodice, and then put your needle in your work to hold that still. And then we're just going to be concentrating on the 1st inch in front of where we're sewing. Don't worry about all the rest for now, because you won't be able to pull it all flat. It's got to stay gathered and however it is. You're just trying to make sure that you're straight. So then just keep sewing at your 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then stop before your pin and take your pin out. And then you can then just move this fabric around a little bit more so that you can get straighter with the next bit you're going to be doing. And you're just sort of pulling it from the back towards the front again. Just make sure everything's all lying flat and not getting turned over. Go on to the next pin. And then we're going to start and pull the lining of the bodice at the other side through and flat, so we can see where we can sew off and transition and miss that. So let me get a bit closer to the edge because I don't think it wants to go just yet. So I'm closest. Let me just take that pin out. I'm going to lift up my presser foot so it just allows me to manipulate this fabric a little bit better. So let's tuck that under from underneath and bring it further forward. I'm just going to use my awl as well because my gathers are wanting to jump forward and away from the corner of my bodice. Take that out of the way. It is difficult for me to try and show you, but at least you can see how much manoeuvring I'm doing. And then press the foot down again, and then we're going to just sew so that we miss the edge of the tie, and then just reverse. Needle out of our work. Let's have a little look and see how we did. Okay, we've got a little bit of a pucker in one side, just in there. It's just gone slightly off. So, as with all good sewing, let's just take out a few stitches. As you know, I've said before, it's not about not going wrong, it's about understanding how to put it right. So I've got a little bit of a pucker just here, look, where the fabric is all folded underneath for me and not got sat straight. So I'm just going to ease those stitches out. So I've just gone to where it was last okay. So let's ease these stitches out. And sometimes it can be easier to sew from the outside into the middle rather than trying to go all the way across. So let's just undo these stitches just here. Okay, so when I'd unpicked it, I've just unpicked between there and there because that's released that little pucker that I'd got. So now I'm going to put this back in again, but I'm going to sew from this edge in because that little bit there was okay, and I can check with the bodice. So just start a little way back from where you were and just reverse, and then just join your stitches up, and then go over where you were and just do a couple of stitches reverse just to anchor that. And I'll show you what that looks like so that you can see too. Oops, lots of threads. So there's my bit where I stopped and undid, and I've just restitched there and then rejoined it there. And you can't tell on the other side at all. That's all nice and neat. Okay, so the next thing then we're going to do then is, once we've checked that, so just check you've got no puckers before you take any of your gathering stitches out. And we're going to pull on our cream threads. So just pull one at a time when you're taking them out, so one row at a time. So take one from the edge and pull that all the way through. Should be 4 threads that have got to come out. Let's do the other one. Right, that one's got sewn over, so let's just leave that one for a moment. And that one has, let's pull that one out, so that's the other one. So let's try from the other side and see if we can pull any out from the other side. It might also have been sewn over. Yeah, it has. Okay, so let me show you what to do with these. So when you've got, I mean, it is up at the top, so you could argue you could leave it in. I just don't leave them in. I don't know why, I just don't like it. But I'm just going to go underneath where the gathered stitches are, and I just unpick that thread as much as I can do, and it'll give you a bit of a tail to then pull onto, to then undo. So I'm on my bobbin thread because that's easier, because we've already pulled that tight, and that just pulls through. And then about here it crosses over, so let me cut through the thread there, and then we can pull that piece out fairly easily. You just have to not yank it the thread all the time when you're trying to take it out, because you can undo your stitches that you've already sewn, which is part of your actual waist seam, and we don't want to do that. So I've got all of those out. I've got both sides out. Oh no, I haven't. Let's pull that side out. Just be gentle. If it won't come, then just snip it. Just means that you've pierced through the gathering thread with your stitches. Quite a lot of loose threads in here as well. This fabric does want to fray quite a bit, but don't worry about that, because all of that's going to get fastened off inside. So we've got a few stitches on the outside here. That's what we're trying to get rid of, is the stitch, any stitches that you can see along the edge there. So I'll just move this to one side so that we can see what we're doing. And then I'm going to go to the middle, and I'm going to fold over 1/4 inch. And then I'm going to match that to the sewn line that we've just done. So I'm just turning under the seam allowance on the lining side of the bib, because the top side of the bib's all sewn down all nicely. But we're just going to tuck in that seam allowance and that edge at the 1/4 inch. That should enclose all of those raw edges and all of that fraying that we've got. And then we'll be able to put a pin along there as well. Make sure that's all straight. On your corners, you just have to tuck it in. That's better. All of a sudden it just suddenly kind of goes. It kind of wants to go anyway, because it's following what you've already stitched on the other side. So that's there. Didn't take off my start and finish thread. Just neaten it up as we go along, and we can neaten this up as we're hand stitching it as well. Oops. Got a thread there, that's it. And then go to this edge as well, and what I do is I kind of fold it out sort of almost straight, so that seam allowance can go in, tuck in the edge, and then fold the seam allowance over the top. And then you can just tuck in any threads that are sticking out, or get rid of them, whichever you prefer. Then we'll just put a pin along that seam at that edge just to hold that still. That's not quite in straight, but you can manipulate this slightly when you're actually doing your stitching down. So there's going to be the inside of our bodice when we've finished, and that's the outside. Now, at the moment it's got the pins on it obviously, but we're going to neaten that up in a second or two. Just make sure everything's all lying all flat where it should do. And it should match perfectly because you've sewn the two sides the same anyway. So then we're going to get our pink thread, just got a single and a hand sewing needle. Put our quilter's knot in the bottom there. And then we can then stitch on here. Now if you wanted to, before you actually finish this off, you could go in the centre and just match your little rosebud. If you go in your haberdashery pack, just get the bows out. Just make sure we don't lose everything else in the process. There's the two, one for the pocket and one for the centre front. Make sure everything else goes back in properly and put that in your pack so you've got that for later. So one of these bows is going to go on the centre front there, just like that. Do I want to sew it? Yes, let's sew it on now. It makes sense too, doesn't it? We've got our hand stitching needle in our hand anyway, so we might as well. Right, let's just get this positioned right. So I'm going to take out the pin holding the centre of the bodice down for now. And I'm just going to decide whether I want which way up and down I want my bow to be, because it's kind of triangular shaped, so there'll be a way that it'll sit nicer than another. That's the way I want it to be. So then let's just reach inside. We want it in the middle with the two. Oh, let's take those other two pins out. We're going to have to do that again in a minute. Hold on 1 second. Change my mind, you see, as I'm going along. So we want this to go in the middle with the two leaves going side to side. And I think what I'm going to do is let's just be a little precise about this. So there's about an inch in between, so I'm going to just put a pin at a ½ an inch across between my straps, and there's an inch depth, so then I'm going to just move my pin down on that line and just take a little bite of my fabric. So it's ½ an inch between each of those two, and that section there is just exactly halfway between the top and the bottom. Because then I can, if we just take the back lining off that pin, keeping that in the same place, that's it. So we can open that up now to get to the inside. And let's just choose our bow. And I want to put the point of the triangle of the bow right on the back of there. And I'm going to get a pin and just put a pin straight through the ribbon. Not easy, because it's quite dense. I've gone off to the side, look. So just position your bow until you're happy with that. That looks quite nice, doesn't it? That'll do. So take that pin out there then. So we've now got it anchored from the back, which is great. Might need to go up just a smidge. So I think it's moved when I'd positioned it. There we go, that's better. Okay, so now I've got my pink thread here, and I'm going to do a few stitches through the back here. Just, they can be quite big ones at the moment, just to kind of hold it in place. Don't need to worry about hiding your knot because it's all going to be hidden inside anyway. So 2 or 3 just anchoring that down, and then we take the pin out because we've got it anchored now. And then what I like to do is, on these ribbons, is I like to take my needle, and can you see in between you've got like the twist of the petal. I like to go so that I can put my needle right in between one of those, if it'll go right for me, right in between the folds of the ribbon. Nearly. There. Yes. So I've got my needle right in between the folds of that ribbon, because then you can do a stitch on it, which then will anchor that part of the top of the ribbon down. I've just pulled some of the threads out of the ribbon itself. Doesn't normally do that. Just tuck those down with your needle. Let's do another one. Up through the edge of the ribbon there. Take a bite of the ribbon and go back in again. And it'll just help anchor it down to the outside of the, anchors the outside of the ribbon down for you. Do you need to do this? Possibly not. Is it me doing belt and braces? Yes. Because then it just holds it down. Ignore that bit, that's a bit of the construction ribbon. I don't quite know where that's coming out. I'm just wrapping that round and tucking it down inside. There we go. Make sure your leaves are going to be coming out the side still. Let's go over to this side here. Just help to anchor it down. Going over to this side here. I think it sort of helps flatten the ribbon. That's it. Just do that all the way around. Likewise, you can just do a few stitches in between and you'll be good to go. So don't worry about that. And then when I'm kind of back to the beginning again, I'll go in through the centre and take a bit of a stitch through the centre as well. So that holds all of those centre ribbons in place. And then I'm just going to go to the side of the edge of the ribbon to where the little leaves are. And I come out a little way through, then I go through the ribbon of the leaf and I go back in through the bodice again just to hold that ribbon in place. Just got one stitch, just holds it out, and then I'm going to go over to the other side as well. So go through the centre, anchor your threads through on the centre. Hoping I've not been mostly off camera for most of that. I've been concentrating. Then come up on the edge of the ribbon. And because the thread's such a good match to the bodice fabric, and I'm just going through the loop of the ribbon and then back in through the bodice again. And if you kind of tuck your stitches just slightly underneath the leaf, you'll find it'll just hold it in place, just out, but without you seeing it. So you can't really see it, but there's the thread, the stitch underneath, just holding it in place. Then I'm just going to go back to the middle and just cast off my stitches, safe in the knowledge that that bow and ribbon flower is not going anywhere. We've hidden all that stitching inside, so that's made it nice and secure, hasn't it? Okay, so let's go back and have a little look. So that's how that's looking, all nice and neat. Let's put the other one on the skirt while we're here, shall we? I'm going to just use my threads again. Single thread again. We don't need a lot of strength on this, do we? It's just enough just to hold it on. And then this one goes in this towards the top of the pocket, I believe. Yeah, looks like towards the top of the pocket. So again, let's just get our position where we want that to go. pin through just to hold it still for me so it doesn't then start to wobble. And we can just check the position of that. Yeah, that's about right, I think. And then if we poke out the inside of the pocket, we can bury our stitches in here, can't we? So let's just take a few stitches in place first just to anchor it down. And take our pin out. And then I'm going to do the same again, because you can see how it sits away from the fabric. And if I show you that one, can you see how it's kind of a bit flatter to the fabric? And that's why I kind of do those extra stitches, just to pull that edge in. So let's go back in again and go through between those petals, or those wraps of the ribbon that make the petal, and make a little stitch just there. It's got one stitch down. Let's move along and do another one. Just make sure you don't go back through your skirt. You're just wanting to go through the layers of just through the layer of the pocket, not through the layer of the actual skirt itself. Another stitch in there, so that's holding that down that side. It's a little bit fiddlier, but again, you know, if you try to put these bows on before you sew your pocket, you're then going to struggle to get your top stitching right on your pocket. So it is just trial and error, just to work out what works best for you and your stitching. So that's another one through. And just keep going all the way around. I'm not going to show you again because you've already seen it once, but we're just going to do those stitches, hiding the threads on the inside, and I'll anchor down my ribbon leaves as well. But look how much flatter that's sitting to the pocket just by sort of pulling those leaves back down and those petals back down to the sides. Okay, come back to you in a minute. Okay, so there's our two bows all nicely sewn on there now. So let's go back to where we were. And we've already got a little bit of memory on that bodice already, where we've tucked it under, look, with a little bit of a fold. Let's go to this edge first. Fold that over and tuck all of that seam allowance in. And the construction for the skirt. It's quite bulky because you've got the straps going in there as well for the ties. So that's one just there. Let's go to the other side as well first. Fold that in and fold it over. And that's going to give us that 1/4 inch seam allowance for there. Make sure you do take your 1/4 inch, otherwise it'll give you a baggy lining, and you don't want to have a baggy lining because it'll try and show over the top of your dress, and you don't want to do that over the top of the bodice. And then let's do that bit there. Pin, need a pin? There's one. Right. Okay, so there we are, we're nearly finished now. We're on the homeward stretch. So all we're going to do now is do a little slip stitch on here and attach that lining down to the same line that we used for our stitching for our gathering when we attached the skirt to the bodice front. So let's take a stitch and hide our thread end, our knot, inside. Just make sure you tuck all of that in as best as you can. It's a little bit messy in that place just there, but it's just because there's so much bulk and you can't cut any off because it's all necessary. So let's do a couple of stitches on the end here. And we'll start and move along. If you've got any threads, you can either take those out or tuck them in. Moving along there now. I do love a lined bodice as well. I do think it really A little bit fiddlier, but it really neatens everything off really nicely. So both inside the dress and inside the pinafore, we've got that kind of finish. And then also inside the bonnet, actually, because that gathered edge in the bonnet is also all lined, isn't it? All nice and neat. As I say, I'm just going to work along that edge and just slip stitch that down, and then I'll come back to you at the end. So that's all finished now, all nice and neat on the inside. So all that remains now is for us to actually pop this onto Clara and have a little look and see how she looks in her lovely completed outfit. There's your shoulders going on, Clara. Let's just put your dress down and get your collar straight. Make sure the tops of your sleeves are all right. That's it. Let's turn her over and do a purbo at the back. So we can get it as a nice neat little bow. Bows are sometimes a law unto themselves, aren't they, to get them just perfect. That's not a bad attempt, Claire. And get those tails to hang down. So that's nice, isn't it? Nice big bow at the back. There's the back of her hat, back of her dress. There's her ribbons. I think Claire in the picture has her ribbons over to one side of her bonnet. So let's just do that. So it comes down the side. Let's get your whiskers smart and straight. Well, how does she look there? Absolutely fabulous. And she still stands straight away with no effort at all. Look at that. I'm loving the little pinafore. That looks really sweet on there. And her little bow on her pocket. It's just there. So she just needs like a little bit of tweaking, I think. But as you can see, just straight off the machine, she's already sitting and standing beautifully and looking lovely. So I'm really, really thrilled with her. Just show you the back as well. So there's the back of her. Oh, look, oh, Preston's come undone, look. Half undressed, Clara, you are. Just pull her hat down over the back of that. So beautiful on the back there. All the way around her hat. Her face is adorable. The ribbon on her. Maybe that could do with being a little bit short. I might trim that off a little bit. But then let's just get you standing up properly. And there she is, already. Right, let me turn the camera around and we'll have a roundup. Well, we've finished. We have a completed Clara who is fully dressed and who is absolutely looking adorable. And if we look at the front of the box, she really does look exactly the same as the front on the box, and I'm thrilled with that and the way that she looks from there. So excuse me, looking straight ahead. I'm looking at what you're looking at sometimes. That's why it looks a bit strange when my eyes aren't in the right place. But I must say that I have enjoyed every single stitch on Clara. I think okay, the face didn't go straight quite as well as planned immediately, but I undid that and did that again, which is the one that I videoed for you. And so it's absolutely adorable, and I have enjoyed every single stitch. The clothes are a little bit elevated, I think, from a lot of dolls that I've seen. They've got the lace trim, they've got the ribbon, all of the gathering, and the multiple layers with the bonnet and the pinafore. And you know, I mean, look at the bow on the back there. Just everything has just been to perfection. The collar sits beautifully for the Peter Pan collar. The bodice is aligned. the quality of the fabrics just shines through as well. And I'm so thrilled and honoured really to have been able to bring this video series to you. So a huge thank you from me to Claire and Richard for allowing me to let loose with one of your kits. I hope that I've inspired other people to have a go at making their very own Clara or one of the other characters. Hopefully there's tips and tricks with each of these garments that you can then use for other garments. And as I said, the steps are the same whether you're sewing a pinafore for a 16-inch doll or an 18-inch doll, 16-inch doll or a 10-inch doll, it doesn't matter. The steps are the same, it's just the pieces of fabric that are bigger. I'd still use a 1/4 inch seam allowance on everything though, so you know I wouldn't change that, just whatever the size is, just to add that 1/4 inch on to the sewing line that's drawn on your pattern, and that will give you your cutting line and your marking line. But yeah, so Lily Rose Dolls, Apple Blossom Woodland collection, fabulous make, absolutely top notch, and I'm absolutely thrilled with that. So I hope you've enjoyed stitching along with me. Please do consider subscribing to my channel. If I'm lucky enough to be able to make any more, I have got another pattern, so well two more patterns, so we'll have a go at doing those at some stage. But I just wanted to say a big thank you, and if you do want to subscribe, please do. If you want to give my channel the video a thumbs up, I'd really appreciate that. If you want to leave me a comment as well, then please do. How do you think I've done with Clara? How do you think the instructions have been in terms of helping you along with putting all this into practice? Hopefully you've been pleased. If not, let me know anyway, but if you have done as well, then please let me know. And from behalf of Clara and I, then I'm off now to do some editing and get these live as soon as I can do for you, so that you too can have such a beautiful doll for your collection too, with her lovely bloomers as well, matching bloomers. Okay, have a great day everybody. I'm thrilled, as you can probably tell, so have a great day and I'll speak to you soon. Take care, bye.